Let me drink a little bit of my story of self water here for some hydration. I decided to build this lesson around story versus school. I'm going to be very specific about that. I come from education. I started teaching early 90s and spent about 25 years in public education. And in my heart of hearts, I was at war with public education because I thought in many ways it was doing more harm to my students than it was the good. And this is one of the questions that is just commonplace in education. It's a meme. Like, why do we need to learn this? So I go and stand in front of a class, and as a biology teacher, I'm teaching mitosis or meiosis or taxonomy, cell respiration, photosynthesis, these topics. And why does a kid need to learn what a Golgi apparatus is? And the students, of course, are sitting there asking that very question, like, why do I need to learn this? And when am I ever going to use this in my life was also another thing. And those two questions are very, very simple, but I don't think we give kids enough credit of how intelligent those questions are. Why do I need to learn this? Like, how is this information pertinent to me? And when am I ever going to use this? Those are two questions that we talk about all the time. But underneath that is like, how is this information usable as a tool? Like, where am I going to apply this in my life? And of course, as an adult, you're just like, well, you're just going to learn it. It's going to be on the test, which becomes even another meme of teachers of like, look, the state creates these standards. We've got to teach them. But the question, why do we need to learn, or where are we ever going to use this, is a question that we have to attempt to answer. In the work that we've done in Story for the last 5 years, I really think actually is a solution to this schooling problem, to where there's a problem with school. And trigger warning, like, I'm going to go after it, like the system of schooling, and I'm using that word intentionally, but the system of schooling pretty directly. I'm going to make a few bold claims. I might be right, I might be wrong, but after 25 years in that system, I feel I have enough experience to offer, I believe, a fair criticism. Because as a teacher, I know other teachers don't like the way that system is going either. And so I want to start with this. This was the question that I'm writing as a statement, is like, why we feel stuck is the question, but it's also the statement, because I'm going to answer this. And what I'm going to tell you is this is the feeling that I believe that kids feel in school, but what's their other option? So they go to school, they don't know why they're learning materials, and then they get stuck. They get stuck in that system. And there's so much frustration there. Now, I'm going to give you 2 data points on that I think are absolutely critical. One is school shootings. They become so much commonplace after Columbine that we don't even report them often anymore, or like Sandy Hook, we just become immune to them. As a matter of fact, they're so unbelievable, it becomes like, well, did it really happen? And we have people who are out there making claims that these things aren't happening or they're not that bad. In Michigan, I lived 2 cities away from Oxford, which had a nasty school shooting, and now where I live in Texas is 2 cities over from Uvalde, where children in elementary school were shot. And so we talk about this, and it's guns, and it's mental health, and it's this. And as an educator, I had to go through all this training about like what to do when there's a school shooting. We had school shooting practice. My kids went to school and there's school shooting. But the question that isn't asked is, why is it happening? Why aren't kids going to the grocery store and shooting them up regularly? I know shootings happen everywhere, but school shootings, to the name, happen in schools, and they happen regularly. Of like, why are kids returning to school to shoot up the school? When I grew up, there wasn't the media around school shootings. I don't remember there being school shootings. I didn't have to walk through metal detectors. I didn't fear. Yeah, in some of the like rougher neighborhoods, there were like metal detectors and things like that. But even then, we didn't hear about school shootings. But what we did hear about when I was growing up was post office shootings. As a matter of fact, that was a meme where it's like if somebody was losing their mind, we said they were going postal. And so like that was that. And then that got solved. But here we live in 2025 and we still haven't solved this issue of school shootings. because we're debating what's happening on the surface of the school shooting without wondering what's happening. Why are people attacking schools? And my argument is because there is a pain that's being manifested there that somebody's seeking to destroy. Like, why would you shoot at somebody else? Because they are a threat to you. So the question is why is a school a threat to an individual? Like, why is the school the source of pain? Of course, we can say it's insane for a teenager to walk into an elementary school and shoot up children. That's insane. But again, why the school? Why is that the source of their pain? Why are they identifying that as their space? Which leads me to my second point about why we feel stuck. And the point that I would argue there is the data that shows that in today's world, 40% of high school students are graduating with no hope for their future, no belief in their own value, no belief that the world is going to be better for them than it was for their parents. But the stat that jumps out to me is that 40% of people who are graduating high school are graduating with no sense of meaning or purpose in their life. And so there's this feeling of pain and apathy that is coming out of that space. And yeah, violence is the extreme end of that pain, but that apathy is part of that same pain too. Now, to answer this question, we're going to go way back, because this is something that I can preach about, but I want to give context to why I believe that story is the solution to this. Like that story is actually the solution, because it's the absence of story that is creating the problem, an absence of meaning and purpose. So let's go back to when I was born. We're going to go back 1 million years ago. And what I want to do is I'm going to walk you through 4 stages of our existence, from our deep ancestors all the way today. Now, 1 million years ago is significant for a few different reasons. As you can see in my amazing drawing here, like, one, we're looking at a system of hunters and gatherers. We've all learned this in school, right? Or learned something in school. It's a system of hunter-gatherers, but also this was a critical tipping point in the history of humankind, because the numbers, I think I wrote this down. There were 12, according to the most recent data, at this point 1 million years ago, there was 1,280 people left on the planet. That's it. That's the size of a small town, right? That's a small high school, for God's sakes. 1,280 people. That was it. That was all that was left. Because life at this time, we're going to look at 2 variables. We're going to look at information, and we're going to look at the tools that were used, because that's what school is supposed to provide, information and tools. So to talk about schools, I'm going to talk about history. And when we look at this, we can see, right, information is about survival. It's about, right, we have fire. We see some use of tools. There's spears and there's some knives and there's some clothing. So primitive tools, primitive information needed. There was language, but there was no writing back then. And so what we have is we have a community based on nature. And so in that, the intelligence that people have and the information that they're going to pass is going to be fully integrated with the nature of their existence, that everything they do is about survival. And so that the information that they're giving each other is critical. How to hunt, how to start a fire. Like, this is information that is critical, and it's fully integrated with nature, and it's fully integrated to the tools. And so their lives, their stories, everything they have is about nature, and it moves. It's going to be the nature of the land, the nature of animals, the nature of water and the ability to drink it, the nature of fire. Like, everything is going to be integrated because they are part of the system. Now we're going to go a long time forward in time. So 990,000 years here to 10,000 years ago. And that next significant leap is going from hunter-gatherer to an agricultural society. And again, I understand that we've learned this, but I need you to see this for 2 specific points, which again is information and tools. And so at this point, there's about 4 to 10 million people. And what we're seeing is that when agriculture is developed, right, the planning of this, what happens is, instead of moving with nature, it becomes humans in nature versus nature. So not humans and nature, but humans versus nature. And we see this contrast evolve, because what we see is there's still the fire and there's still the use of tools, but instead of hunting, it's localized gathering. And so what happens is the community begins to grow and flourish. So we go from 1,280 people to millions of people, because now we're able to localize and combat the role of nature. Doesn't mean that there's still not some migration, things like that. There is. But what we see developing here is this building of walls, which is against nature, roofs against nature. And there's this beginning of this idea of boundaries. There's us, and then there's nature. So there's a separation occurring here. So the information is still very aligned to the tools. There's cooking, there's farming, there's building. So the information is advancing and evolving, and the tools are evolving with it. Small things you might see is like there's these patterns in tools. Like now they're building tools for like gathering, because that's what's happening. Things like buckets, tools in order to create tools. We're seeing this system of like roofing and advancing, but also what we're seeing is the communication is built around the system, and the tools are getting bigger. So shovels and whatever these things are, the scythe or whatever that's called, that these skills, who let this kid play with that? That is a huge no-no. All right, don't let children play with size. Bad things can happen. Also, the domestication of animals. So everything is becoming to occur within these bounds. So information is happening, but these boundaries are now creating communities and cultures built on specific things. So like, cultures in Asia built around the farming in that area versus the farming happening in Europe. And because the environments are different, the tools are different, and because the tools are different, the communication, the information is different. And so what we now have are these cultures that are building out of this space. In about 5,000 more years, the significance of that culture is going to advance into the point of writing and rules and things like that, because when you have boundaries, you have to have rules. Like if you're going to be within this space, in this community, here are the rules that go with that. And again, so information is bounded, it's created and passed down in this. And so that information is becoming more specialized or more specific to this group in what they're doing, but also allows for greater advancements in their tools, in their ability to like build and construct things to separate them, to create that boundary between them and nature. All right, let's advance almost fully 10,000 years to 200 years ago. And so now we see this massive advancement. Now, there's no more fire, but there really is. So we see the fire of industrialization. So 200 years ago is where the industrialization, the industrial revolution has taken full kind of swing. We are now 200 years ago at 1 billion people. We've gone from like agriculture communities to cities, and we see this ability that the information is about the production of information. So we even get this shot of this kid handing out newspapers in the front. We can see these pockets of communication that are occurring. Again, not in a single community, but in the spaces within the community. Because as industrial happens, it becomes about productivity and efficiency. So our culture is moving to a space of specialization, of like individualizing. So a city has a very specific purpose. And so then now you have to network between cities that have trade. So like the city has to learn how to trade with the agricultural city and so on and so forth. But what we do see is this heightened sense of specialization. Again, this further barrier away from nature, like nature isn't even in this picture, this further divide, this further specialization of like making houses. We see specialization in clothing, specialization in tools. Like everybody has these mass produced things instead of there being like a few clay pots. We see everybody has some system of clothing. There's transportation. There's the further domestication of animals. So it keeps on advancing. The information is becoming more massive, and the tools are becoming more specialized. And so now we start splitting not into like what the community does, but what individuals do. So that there's shopkeepers, there's gender roles here that we don't see like in the previous picture. We see men and women are together, but now what we see is the beginning of the separation of genders and gender roles. I'm not saying that that isn't occurring here, but it's way more integrated and it's getting more and more distance. So we see the further we go away from nature, the information and the tools are becoming much more specialized and much more separate from nature. And so what I want us to see with this is this pattern of as the culture shifts, the information and the tools with it shift. And that's going to lead us up into today of understanding, like, why do we need to learn this? Because the priorities in culture are the information that gets passed on and the tools in order to like integrate into that society and whatever. And that seems like very, you know, like very heady, very learning, but it's going to become super important when we see where we are at with ourselves today. So I just Googled a picture and I looked for like something like human technology use today or something like that. And this is the picture that came up. And there is a ton going on in this picture. Like if you look at this, like this is a common picture and we look at this and everything in this picture is somewhat normal. Oh, look at there's a bunch of people on their phones because we've seen these pictures a million times. But if we really look at this, in contrast to those other pictures, which were artist renderings, but when we look at this picture specifically, there's a ton that's jumping out here. One, like if we look at this, is like where they're getting their source of information through technology. So they have a tool that's providing them the information. When we look at the other pictures, the tools were used for a specific outcome: hunting, farming, specialized tools to do your job in the industrial age. But now they become so specialized that the tool itself is providing the information, which is the cell phone. And so that's a huge shift. But what we also see, which is in a picture today, is we see three different people who are standing in the same platform, waiting for the same thing, coming from three different cultures. And what we also see is the further individualization of their fashion. So fashion is highly individualized now, and culture is now being integrated. That the boundaries that have existed in past cultures are being deteriorated, and that they stand in this massive technological system built for transportation. So like where they are and where they're going are totally different worlds. That they can work in one world and exist in this. They can stand in one place, but even on their technology be in a total different world. And so when we're looking at this technological world, we've entered into this whole nother realm of culture. Because so like when we look at before, information was very contained. It was very specific to the tools being used by the community. But what we see in here is the information is near limitless. That anything that we need to know is contained on that device that is within our hand. Anything I want to know, I can find out right now because I have technology. And so it's very social. Like what's going on here is very social because the information about the world is been socialized. Wikipedia, like all of it's out there. But also our communities are now social. So we can stand next to each other and not be in community. Whereas if we're looking back at these things, this is clearly a community. This is clearly a community that needs to exist together. And this is life or death community. So they're in community, but they're not in community. And so what's happening is now there's been this heightened information, but loss of community. And so what community has become is part of the tool, part of the technology. So like we associate our communities to our social networks, which is why we have people who are red, people who are blue, because they can watch their own news channel. They can be on their own social network, whether that's Blue Sky or the Truth one, whatever it is. I can go to my own social network to get my own information. So I'm not in my community, I'm part of an online community, and that's the information and the knowledge that I'm drawing from a community that I'm not even physically in proximity with. And so that then leads to the idea of the tool. Now, this is something when going through this that I actually struggled with, because in this situation, the presumption is the phone is the tool. So when we look at the last pictures, the tools were necessary in order for the culture to thrive. So the information must pass in order to how to use the tool. The information has to pass in order to use the tool. How to domesticate animals, or how to gather wheat, or how to cook, or how to sharpen a tool, like whatever that is. Here, it's starting to separate, still specialized, but there's still this high dependency on communication with each other in order to navigate the cultural system. But when we look at this, the tool has shifted, because what is the thing that is being used in order to engage? It's the phone, but understanding the culture is through the tool. which means our interaction with that technology is really putting us in the position where we are being used. Like, we have become the tool of the information. This is why AI, to many, is very scary, right? The grandfather of AI is like, we should not be doing this. So the guy who is really credited with the development of AI is looking at it and saying that this is a problem. And what he's looking at in this is understanding is what happens when the information becomes intelligent. What is our usefulness? So the tool is useful. The tool is useful. The tool is useful. But now when we're here, is like, where's the usefulness? Well, if it's information, like, where's the tool? It's the technology. And so now there's this problem of identity in where we fit into this. Hold on, let me see where I'm going next. So we now are existing in the generations that we are part of right now is existing in a world where information is everywhere. It is massive, but we do not know what it means. Why do I need to learn this, right? Because it's just now information. It's just data coming at us. All the facts in the world are contained here. So why do I need to learn it? That was a question that was asked before we had cell phones. Because information is so readily available, it's lost its meaning. And so information is king, great. But the thing is the kid asked the right question, what does this mean? And then when am I ever going to use this means, how is this information applied to a tool? If we go back here, simple picture is, why do I need to learn this? Easy thing. Because if you don't learn how to farm, you're going to die. If you don't learn how to cook, you're going to get sick. If you don't learn how to make tools, you are useless. So like the information was critical to the use of the tool. But now it's harder to identify what is the point. What is the point of information if I have it everywhere? And what is my usefulness? If I have all the information, what is my use? And so now we are lost in our culture and we're like beginning to not understand how to answer those two critical questions. Why do I need to learn this? I have everything. And how am I useful? When is this going to be useful to me? Now, I pulled a picture that we often see in education. Anyone who's dealt with education has heard some of these words. And so when we look at this, these are models of education because information is just information. It's data that we memorize for the test, right? That's the point. We learn so we can pass the test. You don't, well, now I have AI, so I'll just have AI take my test. What's the point? But all of these things, like from behavioralism, psychosocial theory, multiple intelligences, right? I'm an auditory learner. I'm a social learner. I'm an active learner. All the different things that we've learned over the years, these are multiple of these modes of learning that we were supposed to integrate in teaching. But for what reason? One of the most dreaded things for me as a teacher was professional development, because someone was going to come in with one of these models and tell me why it was so important. But I was still going to get those same two questions because it never changed that all we were giving to kids was data. Just here's more information that we need you to memorize without a tool, without me being able to tell them when it's useful. Think about this as a simple thing. If I graduate with a high school degree, what does that provide me today? Whereas less than 100 years ago, that provided people a full career. Because if they were educated, right, they could work on the line. If they worked on the line, they could do that for 30 years. They got a retirement, right? They had benefits, live happily ever after. It's that boomer, pre-boomer generation stuff. But we don't have those promises anymore. If I go to high school, that doesn't guarantee me anything except for maybe a path for more education or just for me to get into a manual job. And so when we look at these modes of learning, the problem that we have is we don't even know how to teach the information we're passing on, and we don't know how to make it feel useful. So what we do is we're trying to understand the kid and why they don't want to learn. So if we look at this, what is this, 12 different types of techniques? For what? For teachers trying to figure out how to impart knowledge that the kids don't even know what its usefulness is anymore. And so we keep on going through these cycles. Every couple of years, there's going to be a new thing of like, oh, this is how kids learn. But they don't want to learn. They don't want to learn because that information is already there and it's useless to them. And so we come back to this feeling of feeling stuck. So this is a pretty hopeless conversation. But what I want you to see is along the path, the answer has already been there. We've just lost the path. Like we've lost our way along this. So why we feel stuck, Because we don't know where to go. Because where do I go with information, and where do I go when I don't know what my meaning or my purpose is in this world? But that is a growing phenomenon. That is a phenomena that is going, is the further we go in technology. You look at the work of Jonathan Haidt or any social psychologist, what we're seeing are these epidemics of despair that are increasing as we've increased this. There's been an epidemic amongst especially young women since 2012. Well, guess what happened in 2012? They got online. That's when social media has taken off. All the social media platforms know that they are unhealthy. All the data shows that they're unhealthy. Like, it is psychically damaging to young minds to be on social media. Why? Why is social media so dangerous? Because it's a false community. It's the wrong information, and it makes them feel like that they're not really part of it because it's a false ideal. We've lost identity. And these little tips and tricks that teachers can do not give people an identity. So who am I without cultural information? And who am I if I'm culturally useless? I'm nobody. And so we see this pain epidemic of despair continuing to increase in our culture, especially in developing nations, where people have no sense of identity, no sense of meaning, no sense of value, and no sense of purpose. But we just keep giving them information, right? We keep telling them they got to have a job. So here's where the argument comes in. So there's me teaching again. This was 2016, and I was asked to teach in Tunisia to graduate students. So these are students in their mid to early 20s. They have graduate and doctorate degrees in science and technology. And this conference was designed in order to try to build networks with them, with each other, and with the world. I was actually asked to come in, and literally what I was asked to do is come in and be like, can you teach them leadership? And I said, well, why did they need leadership? Well, leadership isn't anything that was taught in Tunisia, as far as I was told. And I teach leadership as responsibility. And they wanted to start challenging these students to stay in Tunisia because they get their master's, they get their doctorate because their education is free, and then they leave. They go to Europe, Canada, United States because it's a better life there. But in 2016, it was only 6 years after the Arab Spring, and the Arab Spring started in Tunisia. So they would have been teenagers when that happened. But what happened is Tunisia overthrew their dictatorship, and they implemented like a democracy, imperfect democracy because there's corruption. They didn't have a justice system. They didn't have a fully developed like security system like police and enforcement. The government had been corrupt. So like, you know, trying to put leaders in place that were not corrupt, that was all a big challenge. So here I am in their world 6 years later, and I'm teaching them about leadership. And I'm teaching them American, but specifically my own style of leadership, which accept responsibility for those that are coming after you. And so this was a classroom lesson, but at one point I taught several lessons, and I taught from stage to hundreds of them, you know, big auditorium, hundreds of them. And there was a point where at the end of one of the lectures on responsibility of taking care of those who come after you, I was asked a question. And the question was very uncomfortable. A gentleman in the middle of the audience raised his hand and he said, hey, how much does an engineer make in the United States? Like, where you're from? My dad was an engineer. So I said, I'm going to guess 2016, I'd say anywhere, they're going to start anywhere between 45 and 65,000, depending on education and skill. And he goes, well, here, we're lucky if we get a job, and we're lucky if we get that job if we make $15,000. So you're telling me to accept responsibility, but for what? Like, I can go over there and provide for myself, provide for my family, and live a good life. Whereas I don't have that here. And the room goes silent. And here's the thing, you know, he was in the middle back. And I remember like, there's that slow turn of everybody in the audience, and they look at me. And I'm like, I am all alone on this stage. And so quickly, I kind of had to go through this because he was right. And I'm like, fair enough. And so what I said to him was, yeah, you're right. You know, that if you go there, you're going to make more money. You're actually, that's just the beginning. You're going to make a lot more money. You're going to be able to buy a house, a nice car. You're going to be able to provide for your family. You're going to be able to send your kids and give them a great education. Like, you're right. Your future in Europe, Canada, or America is going to be much better. And if you stay here, I don't know if you're going to get a job. I don't know how much you can make, and your family might struggle. So fair enough. From where you're sitting, that looks like an easy choice. But this was my question. Is that the point? Is the point of what we're learning to make a lot of money? Because that's what I've been taught, and that's what he had been taught. Or is it to be educated? So there's learning for knowledge to provide a tool, which is to make a lot of money. But there's also education, because the kids are like, why do I need to know this? And they're right. But education, that's why I kept on calling it school, is something different. Education literally translates to lead out. To lead out, educar, means to lead out. And so when we look at education, the point is like not just to learn, but to lead the way forward, because the advancements we saw in those previous pictures, from hunter-gatherer to agriculture to industrialization, all happened because of information and tools, because they kept on getting passed on in advance so all of culture could advance. And now we're in a technology era where we've gone heavy in information and we've lost the skills. And now the thing is the only thing that we know now is, because we've been so atomized into individualization, is like what we can do for ourselves, because that's what we've been told. I need information so I can make money. So what I answered to that young man is I said, but there's another choice. You can go and you can take care of you. But that Arab Spring was about freedom. And that freedom can be used for you to advance yourself and to take care of yourself in that. But I go, that's not what I read about the Arab Spring. I thought the Arab Spring was making it better for all people, not just you. And I said, so you can go and you can take care of yourself, or maybe you stay here and you struggle as a generation. If all of you stayed here and you built car companies and you built the systems and the schools and you built all the things around this that allowed maybe you to struggle throughout life, but maybe the next generation has it that little bit easier. If you stayed and built that, then maybe your kids or your kids' kids don't have to go to Canada to get a great job, because the great jobs are here in Tunisia. I said, just a different way to look at it. I said, you can go and get what's yours right now because you've put in the work in your education, or you can sacrifice now so that the person coming after you, they can have a bit more. They can have a better choice. And the thing is like, I don't know what he chose. I don't know what any of them chose. But the difference between being an individual and being part of a community is the ability for us to not learn for myself, but to learn so that I have something to pass on to the next generation, that I have something to offer. And so when I'm looking at this system of like why we feel stuck, is because the lack of purpose means like, what is the point of my story? Like, what am I here for? If not to make it better for them coming up. But if all I'm doing is saying your job as an individual is to make the world better for yourself, well, I'm going to take care of me and mine. Well, how's that working out for people? Look at the despair. Look at the divorce rate. Look at the individualization that we become. So all there is us for them, us versus them, red versus blue, man versus woman, black versus white. Why? Because without a story, we lack identity. We just don't know who we are and where we're going. And what I'm going to do is start bringing this into story. But what I want you to see in this is this idea isn't just part of our culture. It's messing up our brains. So this is a slide I've shared before. I love to teach this slide. The best part of this slide is not even my information. This information comes from Ian McGilchrist. So if you really want to like understand this, like he has 1,000 things online. He has books that are massive where he goes into this. So when we go back to this picture about like how people learn, Ian McGilchrist has really kind of broke this down into the simple, like, let's look at your left brain and let's look at your right brain. Now, when I was growing up, they used to do this like, oh, people put your hand over this. If your left thumb goes over your right thumb, you're more creative. And that was all hooey and all that. And so people just didn't look at that for a long time until Ian McGilchrist looked at this, because he was working with people who had experienced closed head brain injuries and strokes. And what he found is wherever the stroke was caused their brain to work in a different way. There's also a great TED Talk called A Stroke of Insight, I think it's called. It's one of the top TED Talks of all times, where she suffers a stroke in her left hemisphere, and it completely changes the way she experiences the world. So you don't have to take my word for it. There's plenty of science out there. But what this slide is going to tell us is very important to the process of history. Because remember, in the beginning, we were fully integrated to nature. And then it was us versus nature. Then it was us and nature. And then it's just all blurred. No boundaries, limitless information. Where do we belong? And so what I'm going to show you is why this is messing up with our brain. And so if we look at the brain, I took some notes here on some of the words that go here. And what I want you to see is this. On this left side of the hemisphere, so our left side of our brain, this is looking down. The brain is looking down. So I know it's on the right side, but there's a reason why I want that, because your left brain is here. If you look in the mirror, it will look like your right side. But anyway, science thing. So Ian McGilchrist calls this the emissary, but let's look at the words it is. The left brain, the way it works, it's based on, this is how it deals with information. It's very analytical. It's very linear. It's very mechanical. It's very language driven. It's very logical and reasoning. It seeks to make what is symbolic and abstract concrete. So it's trying to make everything knowable. It seeks certainty. Its process is narrowing things down. It loves to categorize things. It's very reductive. It takes things down to the simplest things. And often when it's in pain or chaos, it will seek control. It's seeking certainty. That is the key. It seeks certainty. Right? It says this right in the middle here. It closes down to a certainty. Now, think about all the worlds that we just went through. You know, if we look at, I'm going to go all the way back. Look at us go. Is this a world of certainty? Absolutely not. A world of certainty. A bit more, but no. More predictable, right? We're moving towards certainty. So industrialization brings in this heavy left brain way of things closing down. Notice, like, this is a process where jobs are kind of fluid, integrated. The culture is integrated to where it becomes very distinct, very categorized, very, what were words? Very logical, very mechanical, very linear, very scientific. Right? All these great advancements come, but it's very, very left-brained. And so when we look at this, it's putting the emphasis of the brain on control and certainty. And so the world that we're in is very technological, very analytical, very data, very, very logical, reasonable, very organized, right? Got to have our apps aligned. Everything's very technical, right? Technological world, technical. But what happens is our left brain then becomes the driver. And what happens is everything is about narrowing things down. And so when we look at this picture of why we're stuck, look at what we're seeing. We're seeing ultimate isolation. Like, this image is very alone. Kids today feel very alone. They lack of meaning and purpose. Why? Because everything is about narrowing it down. You graduate high school and you're a combination of two numbers. What's your grade point? What's your SAT score? We're narrowing people down to data. That's all you are. When you apply to college, it's just information. Well, clearly, because there's so many people, and get it. I get it. But everything is about ranking systems and data. That is very left brain. And remember, the challenge of this thing is like the failure of information, the failure of our ability to learn in the way that we need to learn in order to feel part of. Because the pain and the suffering is real. And the problem is it's heavy on this. Now let's look at the right brain, which is not as engaged in today's society. And the words are, the right brain sees the world in a more holistic way. It's more integrative. It's more focused on emotional processing, something that we're not great at. Recognizing uniqueness. So not individualizing and atomizing, but seeing the whole and seeing unique patterns in the whole. It is very open to possibility. It sees the world in its fullness. It sees interconnectedness, not categorization. It is high empathy and nuance. And the right brain is good at taking multiple perspectives. Completely different way of looking at the world. Again, let's go back to the beginning and think right brain or left brain. Holistic. Everybody has to take part in everything. Integrative. This was an integrative natural state. Wholeness. They're one with the land. Yeah, they're creating separation between them and the environment, but still, that boundaries are still about creating this as the whole. There's the in, there's the out. But but it's an integrative society. And then we see the beginning of the separation. More walls, right? A few walls, tons of separation. We even see the groups are starting to like atomize here, like more and more. It's this more and more separation, but the right brain doesn't do well with that. And here we see it in its completeness, that like they are standing shoulder to shoulder and are completely separate. They're connected to a whole different world that is categorized for them. So like our communities have become heavily left brain. Our technology has made us heavy left brain. Why do I need to learn this? When will I ever use this? That's a left brain thing. I don't know where I'm going with this. Like, okay, but where do we belong as a society? So what I'm going to talk about next is like, well, what was lost along the way? Because the thing is as we've advanced and as we've moved through this journey, the thing is like, okay, we've gained a ton of technology, right? We have 8 billion people on this planet now. Like we gained so much in efficiency and productivity. Like we boomed out the Industrial Revolution and technology. I can order something today and it can come tomorrow. Like technology has solved so many of our social issues. But what was the cost? What did we lose along the way? Now, my answer is going to be weird for a second. We've lost fire. Yeah, I know we still have fire today. But if we look at this, if we look at the pictures, one of the things that's pretty cool and interesting along the way is, right, there's the fire. Here's the fire at the middle of their community. Here's the fire right in the factories in the background. Now the fire has disappeared, right? It's a battery and a phone. My phone keeps on binging at me. And so what we've got to at this point right here is like, oh my goodness gracious, I don't know how to mute that. Sorry. So what we have here is what has been lost is the fire, because the fire is the place where stories were passed. The fire is the thing at the center of this. When I went to a developing country, in Africa, not Tunisia, but I was in Tanzania, right in the middle of the community, there was always a place where there was a fire going and somebody tending the fire all the time. That's where the community built. So people didn't have to start their own fires. They could come there, take the fire, take it back to the hut, and they could cook from that. But fire was at the center still of their community as a developing nation. We've lost this fire, which is the center of the community, because what happens around a fire? Stories. I guarantee you, get 10 of your friends, let it be at night, put on some, bug spray, sit around the fire, put your phones away, and just sit there quiet for 2 minutes. Guess what's going to happen? Hey, you remember the time? It's just natural that when you bring people around a central point, people will begin to share stories. Now, the business we're in, Story of Self, it's this attempt to reclaim the thing that was lost. That information back in the day used to be stories. Now information is just data. Information used to be about how we connect to the whole. But now if you look at information, it's about like knowledge, it's data, right? When do I got to pay the bills? How much am I going to get paid this week? What are my taxes? Like, when is this due? What do I have to get this done? Information that we talk about on a daily basis is heavily focused on just the information. But there's another source of information. There's information as data and knowledge, which is the world we live in today. But there's information that imparts a narrative. It imparts meaning and purpose. The point of a story is to have a purpose. If you've ever heard a story without a point, where somebody just tells a story without ending anywhere, that's very irritating, because like nobody just wants to be inundated with information. That's why kids hate school, because they sit there for 7 hours and just get information thrown at them. It's not meaningful. That's why they lack this sense of meaning. The 60%, if we looked at the data of the 60% of people who think they have meaning and purpose, I guarantee it's career related. The people who are listening to this, I guarantee you, if you think what your purpose in life is, it's going to be related to one of two things. It's going to be your career or your family. But what about you? You're more than your career. You're more than your family. What is your story? And one of the things I like to teach when we teach story is this idea that this left brain, it shows up right here on the left side of your circle. My life, as I know it, data, when I is about avoiding challenges. It's about creating control and certainty. Think about everything you do is to minimize chaos. And fair enough. Oh my God, I've got to make this much money so I can pay these bills. That's numbers, that's data, that's information. But that's not teaching us anything. There's no tool in that. There's nothing to impart, like, well, you better brush your teeth or else you're going to get cavities. That's a story, because you're telling information that has a point. It leads them to a higher value. And so when we look at our system here, we're looking at the left side of story. What we're seeing is that we exist in a world that is trapped between what it knows and avoiding challenges. This is why we've lost our identity, because where's the change in that? Who am I in that situation? Well, what are we doing? Well, we're avoiding death. Well, then why is the suicide rate going? Why is there lack of meaning and purpose? Because we've forgotten what we're really meant to do, which is be part of a whole, part of a community, part of a greater story than our own. Our lives are meant to be about a bigger purpose, which goes just beyond how much money you make. I hated, like, when I go meet a new group of people and you sit around with a group of guys and the first question they're going to ask you is, so what do you do for a living? Because that's the only thing we can engage in, is our own productivity, because we lost this ability to share a common story. And so what we see in story is this ability to get to the right side of our brain is we have to leave the left side of the brain. We have to go beyond information and ask ourselves the bigger question of, why am I here? What does this mean? And our kids are screaming those questions at us, and we just keep on being like, got to go to school, get a good job, right? Because you got to pay the bills, live happily ever after. Don't worry, there'll be a midlife crisis. You'll probably get a couple divorces. You'll probably end up drinking a lot, and in the end, you'll die. And what's the point? Wrong story. Wrong story. Yeah, there's deaths that occur along the way, but there's also transformation. Our lives are purpose. Yeah, it's more than survival. Yeah, it's more than just gathering wheat or corn. Yes, our lives mean more than that. But it's this community aspect of understanding that we're meant to lead and leave something for the future generations. Our lives are our stories. What is the thing that will be left? All that's going to be left. Well, I'm going to leave my kid my cell phone. Cool. But what is the story that we're going to leave? That is the thing that life is still asking us. It's asking us, what is the story that we will leave behind? And so the challenge in this is to shift our stories to a greater sense of being, away from just what we know, but to step willingly into the challenges of the unknown, about where are we going and what are we going to do in life. But that means we're going to have to let some things go. There's parts of this culture we have got to be willing to put down. What is the information that's relevant to my story? Not my career, but my story. What's most important to me? And then how do I meet that? So like that guy in Tunisia, is the most important part of the story is how much money he makes and the money he provides his family? Well, I've worked with very wealthy people. I can tell you this, not always the best legacy is a lot of money. But what is always a great legacy is the love that we leave behind. Were they there? Were my family there for me? When I fell, did they pick me up? And when I triumphed, were they there cheering me on? That's a story. That's a story that you tell around a campfire. Right? We tell the stories of triumph and becoming, not of, tax evasion and mortgages. Oh, what kind of rate did you get on that thing? Nobody cares. Nobody cares. What do you do for a living? What do you believe for a living? And so we have to engage our right brain and begin to step back and ask ourselves, what if my story means something in this world? What if what we're supposed to learn is our place in this world? Not how to be a more successful employee, but how to be a more successful human being. That's a different thing. What is the legacy I'm going to leave behind? And the thing is I'm either facing a challenge and I'm choosing the world that I know, or I'm going to face the challenges and I'm going to allow those things to transform me so that I can create a new world. Because that's what I think all humans are here to do. If we look at this, what is the pattern beyond just moving towards more technology? Oh, life is easier. Life isn't meant to be easier. It's meant to be better. It's meant to continue to grow so we can do better by each other. Yeah, we've gotten a lot of goods and a lot of resources, but we've lost community. And so that's why we feel stuck. because we've lost our place, we've lost our purpose, we've lost our meaning, and in losing that, we've lost our individual meaning, our own individual meaning. And so we've got to step in here and decide, what is the story that we want to live? Change the narrative. You are not the tool. You are not just a set of data. And if you are, you're just going to get replaced by a computer soon anyway. And then what does your life mean? Oh, well, we'll give you universal basic income. Doesn't solve the meaning problem. What does my life mean? Well, the life of meaning means you know your story and you know the story that you're attempting to live, the story that you're attempting to leave behind. And so the challenge this week is for us to take story back, not just as individuals. That's what we do in Story of Self, but as a culture, as a community, as a group, as a family, as a husband, as a wife, as a child, like just as a member of a community. And in the two questions is like, one, pay attention this week to the story you're being told around your campfire. Like, pay attention to it. What is the stories that the world is telling you every day? I'll give you a hint. A lot of it's going to deal with consumption. Like, that's like, you are what you buy. No, you're not. Like, show me psychologically where that ever plays out. There's no data that supports that. So what is the story that you believe because society has told you? You better start asking yourself that question if you want to find your purpose. Because otherwise you're going to die and go, like, what was the point of me being here? But the more important question that I want you to push is like, what is the story that you're going to tell? And what is the story that you're telling yourself right now about yourself? You know, we say this all the time in Story of Self. You got to take your story back. You got to take your story back. You got to own it. Because if you don't realize it, if you don't pay attention, you're going to get towards death and you're going to realize you never even lived your own story. You know, oh, I got a job. I had a family. I did all these things. Great. I traveled. Great. What impact did you have? How is the world better because you existed? What story are you leaving behind? Because if all you're leaving behind is material goods, then what's the point of that? No, we got to make things better. And we got to believe it, that our story matters. You got to believe that you are not here by accident, that your story is about survival. It's a story that a million years ago, there was a small group of people that somehow fought their way to survive, to build a community that learned how to farm and live together and survive nature, survive war, survive pestilence, to build cities, to build technology that we get to sit and benefit from today. But every one of our generations lived so that we could get this. And we've got to now ask ourselves, like, what is the thing that we're going to leave behind? Because if this is what we're leaving behind, shame on us. Shame on us. So what's your story? Go find it. That's purpose. That's the thing we need to do. We have to reclaim the thing that we've lost through our advancements. We've gained technological in material possessions to the nth degree, but it cost us our stories. And that is taking our lives. It's taking our lives. We're living in despair. That's the lesson this week. Now go do your homework, figure out what your story is, get the frick out.